welcome to the deep dive. You've given us some really interesting material, and, well, our job, like always, is to pull out those key insights so you can get up to speed, quickly and effectively.
Yeah.
You want those aha moments without getting lost in the weeds, so let's just dive right in.
Okay, so today we're digging into creativity, looking at these excerpts you sent from The Craft of Creativity by Cronin and Loewenstein.
Right.
And the big idea here, it isn't really about judging if some final product is creative or not. It's more about understanding the process, how we can actually get better at being creative ourselves.
By shifting perspectives, you mean?
Exactly, by consciously shifting our perspectives. That's really the heart of it today.
That's a really useful way to frame it, because the authors, they really hit on something, didn't they? We all agree. Creativity is important. You hear it everywhere. Education, business.
Yeah. Science.
Yeah, everywhere. But underneath that, there's this feeling that it's, well, scarce. Like it's hard to find or do.
We value it a lot, but we often feel like we're maybe not measuring up.
Yeah. And it's not like people aren't trying.
No, definitely not. So our goal here is to look at their work and figure out, okay, why does it feel scarce? And more importantly, how can we get better at that whole creative process?
Okay, so first off, they kind of tackle this common idea. Creativity means totally new stuff, right? Like inventing something from nothing.
Right, the novelty trap.
Yeah, but they really want us to move past just focusing on how new the end result is and look instead at the process that got us there. That, they say, is where the understanding really starts.
Precisely. They make this distinction between, let's call them ordinary products, which mostly rely on what they call craft.
Our skills, our knowledge.
Yeah, exactly, your existing toolbox. And then creative products, which need that craft, that foundation, plus something more, that creative element.
So craft is the baseline.
It's essential. Craft is the toolkit, you could say, and creativity is about using those tools in, well, unexpected or different ways.
Okay, and this is where it gets interesting, right? They suggest this creative part involves actively forming different perspectives.
Yes, and using the knowledge we already have, but in new ways. It's not just about having the facts. It's about reframing how you look at things using what you know.
Right. And they also make this point about how we decide something is creative. Like when we look at something.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating. Often when we see something as creative, it's because we're experiencing a shift in how we see things.
So it's partly in the eye of the beholder.
Partly, yes. Or we're picking up on external signals, like how it's presented, or maybe the creator's reputation, things that tell us, hey, this is innovative.
So it's not just inherent in the object itself. It's also our interpretation, the context.
Okay.
Now, this idea of perspective, it seems absolutely central to their whole argument about creativity. Can we break that down a bit more? What is a perspective in their view?
Absolutely. So they define a perspective as basically a way of understanding a situation, a lens, you could say.
A lens.
And it's built from the concepts we have, right? And these perspectives form the basis of our stories.
Stories.
Yeah, our internal explanations of what's happened, what's happening now, and maybe what's going to happen. It's how we make sense of everything.
Got it. So the perspective shapes the story we tell ourselves about what's going on. And they use that riddle, the one about Jim and the man in the mask, to show how important perspective is.
That's a great example, because at first, if you don't have the right perspective, the riddle just feels weird, confusing.
Yeah, afraid to get home because of the man in the mask makes no sense.
Because as soon as you get the perspective, oh, it's a baseball game.
Right. Jim's on third. The catcher's the man in the mask.
Exactly. The whole thing clicks into place. That perspective unlocks the meaning. It lets you understand the story.
So a key takeaway for you listening, finding that right perspective can just instantly switch confusion to understanding. Really key for creative problem solving. Okay, that totally makes sense. So if creativity isn't just about pure novelty and it's tied so closely to perspective, how does that actually work in the creative process? How do we get from our normal viewpoint to something creative?
Well, the authors argue that a really fundamental part of creativity is changing our perspective, actively shifting it.
Okay.
When we manage to do that, when we shift our viewpoint, it suddenly opens up possibilities, ideas, or solutions we couldn't even conceive of from our original standpoint.
Like seeing a door you didn't know was there.
Exactly like that. It reveals hidden paths.
And they use that fantastic real-world example of the engineer, Nakatsu, and the Shinkansen bullet train. Can you walk us through that one? How did perspective lead to innovation there?
Sure. So Nakatsu had this problem. The train's pantograph, the thing on top connecting to the power lines, was making a lot of noise at high speeds.
Right, like a sonic boom.
Yeah, disturbing people.
Yeah.
And his usual engineering approach, the standard methods, they weren't really cutting it.
He was hitting a wall.
He was. But then he deliberately tried to look at the problem differently. He started thinking about birds. Specifically, how some birds, like owls, fly almost silently.
Ah, an analogy.
Exactly. That shift in perspective, thinking about silent movement in nature, the mechanics of an owl's wing, that's what sparked the innovative designs that massively reduced the noise.
And it's really important, like they stress, this wasn't some instant eureka
Yeah.
moment, right?
No, not at all. It was part of a longer journey, a process. It showed he'd actually developed the skill of making connections and consciously changing his perspective. It's learnable.
Okay. And to explain this further, they use that driving metaphor. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I like this one too. They say craft or normal skills is like driving straight down a road you know well.
Got the map, know the destination.
Exactly. You're efficient, you know how to get there. Creativity, though, that's like deciding to take a completely new turn off that main road.
Venturing off piece.
Right, you're going into the unknown. And that turn, it might lead you somewhere totally unexpected, and it might even change how you think about the whole journey you were on.
That captures it really well, that deliberate break from the usual path. Okay, so these perspective shifts lead to new possibilities. But what actually triggers this shift? What starts that change?
Right, so that's where insights come in. They define insights as those specific moments when our perspective actually does shift.
The aha moment itself.
Kind of, yeah. But even if the insight isn't a complete solution right away, like Nakatsu thinking about the owl, it starts a process. It kicks off the building of a new understanding. The owl idea wasn't the final design, but it was the crucial insight that pointed him in a new direction.
So the insight is like a catalyst. It breaks the old pattern, lets new ideas come through. They also mention a stoplight model. Inquire, discover, insight. What's that about?
The stoplight model just shows a pretty common way these shifts happen. Usually we start by inquiring, like trying solutions within our current way of thinking.
Sticking to the known road?
Right. Then, if that doesn't work, we might discover some new information or maybe a concept that just doesn't quite fit our existing view. Creates a bit of tension.
Okay, like something feels off.
Exactly. That tension, that feeling of this doesn't add up, can then lead to the insight, the actual shift, the light turning green, so to speak.
Makes sense. Like hitting roadblocks forces you to look for other routes.
Yeah.
But they also point out that just inquiring can be tough because our current perspective can make the solution seem, well, impossible.
Absolutely. Our perspectives act like filters,
Yeah.
right? They highlight what seems relevant based on our current understanding, and they pretty much block out anything that doesn't fit, which makes it incredibly hard to even think of the concepts you might need to see things differently.
Like blinkers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They use that classic priest riddle,
Right.
you know the one. Man marries 20 women in his parish, same day, legally, but he's not a polygamist.
Oh, yeah. Because he's a priest, he's marrying them on to other people.
Right. But our automatic assumptions about marries, that it means getting married, makes the answer seem totally out of left field. Our perspective blinds us.
Our assumptions get in the way. Okay. Now, we've talked a lot about perspective and insight, but the book's title is The Craft of Creativity. So what about craft? What role does our existing skill and knowledge play in all this perspective shifting?
Yeah, they're really clear on this. Craft isn't secondary. It's absolutely foundational.
It's not either.
Definitely not. Even things that seem like simple creative tasks.
Yeah.
They use the egg drop challenge example. Teams figuring out how to protect an egg.
Building contraption.
And that relies on basic knowledge, right? Understanding gravity, maybe some simple physics, knowing about materials. That's all craft.
So creativity uses craft. It builds on it.
It builds on it and redirects it. You need that solid base of skills and information in whatever area you're working in for any meaningful creativity in that area to even happen.
Okay. And what about that common idea that maybe beginners, novices, are more creative because they don't have all the ingrained assumptions?
Right, they address that. And it's true, novices might be less stuck in certain ways of thinking.
Less baggage.
Sort of, but they argue that really significant creative breakthroughs usually demand deep craft knowledge. It takes expertise to push boundaries meaningfully, plus how we perceive creativity is relative.
Ah, right. What looks creative to a beginner might be standard stuff for an expert.
Exactly, and vice versa sometimes. So deep knowledge is generally crucial for big creative leaps.
That's a really key distinction. It's not that ignorance is bliss for creativity, but that a strong foundation lets you make more powerful jumps. Now, they also mention uncertainty, which makes sense, right? If you're deliberately shifting perspective into the unknown.
Yeah, that's got to feel uncertain.
Hmm?
And it is. Uncertainty is just baked into the creative process. When you change perspectives, you are, by definition, stepping into territory where your old maps don't fully work.
Into the void, sort of?
Kinda, yeah. And the authors acknowledge that this can be uncomfortable. They do mention that later parts of the book explore ways to actually handle that uncertainty.
Okay, so it's not always smooth sailing. There's some grappling involved. Good to know. Towards the end of the material you shared, they start talking about thinking tools to help with these shifts. What are those about?
Right, so these are basically learnable strategies, cognitive tools that can help us deliberately shift perspective when we feel stuck.
Practical techniques.
Yeah. They briefly introduce four main ones, which they explore more later.
Mm.
Activation,
Okay.
which is about bringing relevant knowledge you already have to the front of your mind. Then analogy, like the owl and the train.
Making connections.
Right. Combination, mixing existing ideas in new ways. And recategorization, rethinking how you classify things.
Activation, analogy, combination, recategorization. Okay. Sounds like useful stuff.
They are. They give you concrete ways to sort of shake up your thinking when you need to.
Okay, so if we pull this all together,
Mhm.
what's the main takeaway message from this deep dive into the craft of creativity?
I think the absolute core message is that creativity isn't just some magical ability to dream up totally new things.
Right.
It's fundamentally about the process of intentionally shifting how you see things, shifting your perspective.
And that process usually builds on a solid foundation of skill and knowledge.
Your craft, exactly. And crucially, this whole thing, this process, it's not some fixed talent you either have or don't. It's a skill,
Something you can learn.
something you can learn, practice, and actually get better at.
So less waiting for lightning to strike and more about actively learning how to look at the world differently. That's actually quite empowering.
It is.
Okay, so for you, the listener, here's a final thought to chew on. Think about some challenge you're dealing with right now. Could be work, a hobby, anything. What are the basic assumptions you're making about that situation? What feels absolutely fixed or true about it? Now, what if you deliberately try to look at it from a completely different angle? Even one that seems totally weird or unrelated at first. What might happen? What unexpected ideas could that spark?
That's a great exercise. Really pushes you to apply these ideas.
Well, that wraps up this deep dive into the craft of creativity. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, hope this gave you some interesting things to think about.
Definitely. And, in future deep dives, we could absolutely get into those specific thinking tools, activation, analogy, combination, recategorization in more detail.
Hey, for sure. There's a lot more there.
Or we could look at those cues they mentioned, the things that signal maybe it's time for a perspective shift, like hitting a wall, feeling dissatisfied, being surprised.
Impasse, dissatisfaction, surprise, crosstalk.
Yeah.
Yeah, all fascinating triggers.
Lots more to explore. But until next time.
We hope you'll reflect on these ideas and see how they might apply to your own world.